Tupelo, Mississippi. September 1957. Elvis Presley had just become the biggest star in America. His first movie was a hit. His records were selling millions. He'd gone from poverty to wealth in less than 2 years. One Sunday morning, Elvis drove back to Tupelo, walked into the small church where he'd grown up, and left something in the donation box that would change that church forever. What he left, and the note he wrote, revealed everything about who Elvis really was. The church that raised him, the First Assembly of God. Church in Tupelo, Mississippi was a small, modest building on the poor side of town. It had maybe 50 regular members, mostly working-class families who struggled to pay their bills but showed up every Sunday to worship together. Elvis had attended this church from the time he was 2 years old until he was 13, when his family moved to Memphis. His mother Gladys had been deeply religious, and she'd made sure Elvis grew up in the church, learning hymns and gospel songs, absorbing the faith that would stay with him his entire life. Some of Elvis's earliest musical experiences happened in that church. He'd stand on a chair during services and sing hymns, his small voice carrying through the sanctuary. The congregation would smile and clap, encouraging the shy boy who loved to sing. Reverend James Hamill, who'd been the pastor during Elvis's childhood, later said, "Elvis was always musical, even as a small boy. But it wasn't just talent, he felt the music. When he sang hymns, you could tell he meant every word. He wasn't performing, he was worshiping." The church had been a refuge for the Presley family during their poorest years. When Vernon, Elvis's father, was in prison for check forgery in 1938, the church had helped Gladys and baby Elvis with food and rent money. When the Presleys were evicted from their home and living in a one-room shack with no electricity, the church had provided clothes and supplies. "This church saved us when we had nothing," Gladys told Elvis when he was older. "They didn't judge us for being poor, they just helped. Remember that, son. When you have the chance to help others, you do it. You give back." Elvis never forgot those words, and in September 1957, he finally had the chance to give back in a way his mother had always hoped he would. The return to Tupelo. Elvis had left Tupelo in 1948 when his family moved to Memphis seeking better opportunities. He'd been 13 years old, shy and poor, just another kid from the wrong side of the tracks. 9 years later, in 1957, Elvis was the biggest name in entertainment. His first movie, Love Me Tender, had been a massive success. His records, Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, were dominating the charts. He'd been on television, causing controversy with his hip movements and changing the face of popular music. Elvis had money now, more money than he'd ever imagined having. He'd bought his parents a nice house. He'd bought himself cars and clothes. He'd gone from having nothing to having everything in less than 2 years. But success hadn't changed how Elvis felt about Tupelo or the people who'd helped him when he had nothing. In September 1957, Elvis was back in Mississippi for a concert in Jackson. He had a day off, and instead of relaxing at a hotel, Elvis made a decision. He was going back to Tupelo, back to the church that had helped his family, back to the place where he'd first learned to sing. Elvis didn't tell anyone he was coming. No press releases, no photographers. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to do something he'd been thinking about for months, something his mother had suggested, but he'd needed to figure out how to do right. On a Sunday morning, Elvis drove his Cadillac into Tupelo, parked a few blocks away from the church so the car wouldn't draw attention, and walked to the First Assembly of God. It was 9 a.m. Sunday service was about to start. Walking through those doors. When Elvis walked through the church doors, he was wearing sunglasses and a simple suit, trying to be inconspicuous. He slipped into a back pew, hoping nobody would recognize him. But within minutes, people started whispering, "Is that Elvis Presley?" "It can't be." "That's Elvis, I'm sure of it." By the time the service started, everyone in the church knew Elvis was there. Reverend Hamill, who'd been Elvis's pastor during his childhood, looked out at the congregation and saw Elvis sitting in the back, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. Reverend Hamill smiled. "Folks, we have a special guest this morning. Elvis Presley has come back to visit the church where he grew up. Elvis, would you like to come up and say a few words?" Elvis shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with being put on the spot. But the congregation started applauding, and Elvis realized he couldn't refuse without seeming rude. He walked to the front of the church, still wearing his sunglasses, and stood at the pulpit where Reverend Hamill usually preached. "Good morning," Elvis said, his voice quiet and uncertain. "I'm sorry for disrupting your service. I didn't mean to cause a fuss. I just wanted to come back to the church that meant so much to me growing up." The congregation was silent, hanging on every word. "This church helped my family when we had nothing," Elvis continued, his voice getting stronger. "When my daddy was in prison and my mama was struggling to feed me, this church gave us food and clothes and hope. When we were living in that one-room shack on Old Saltillo Road with no electricity or running water, people from this church came and helped us. I was just a kid then. I didn't fully understand what you all were doing for us, but my mama did. She never forgot it. She told me, 'Elvis, if you ever have the chance to help others the way this church helped us, you do it. You give back.' Well, I have that chance now. God has blessed me with success I never expected, and I want to give back to the church that gave so much to my family." Elvis pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is a small way of saying thank you for everything you did for the Presleys, for teaching me about faith and music and helping others, for being there when we needed you most." Elvis walked over to the donation box at the side of the altar and placed the envelope inside. Then he returned to the pulpit. "I hope you'll use this to help other families who are struggling the way we struggled. That's what my mama would want. That's what I want." Elvis walked back to his seat in the back pew while the congregation sat in stunned silence. Reverend Hamill was crying. Several people in the congregation were crying. The service continued, but everyone was distracted, wondering what Elvis had put in that donation box. What was in the envelope? After the service ended, Reverend Hamill opened the donation box in front of the church elders, as was customary. Inside was the envelope Elvis had placed there, along with the usual small donations from congregation members, ones and fives, the modest contributions of working-class families. Reverend Hamill opened Elvis's envelope. Inside were 50 $100 bills, $5,000. In 1957, that was an enormous amount of money. The average annual income in America was about $4,000. Elvis had just given more than a year's salary to his childhood church. But it wasn't just the money that made Reverend Hamill cry. It was the note Elvis had included with the cash. Written in Elvis's handwriting, the note said, "Reverend Hamill and the First Assembly congregation, this church saved my family. When we had nothing, you gave us everything that mattered. Food, clothes, hope, faith, love. My mama always said that the songs I learned in this church were the foundation of everything I've done in music. She was right. Every gospel song I've ever sung, every bit of passion I put into my music came from the faith I learned here. I can never repay what you gave us, but I want to try. This money is for the church. Use it however you need, repairs, helping families who are struggling, whatever God leads you to do with it. The only thing I ask is that you remember where it came from. A poor family from Old Saltillo Road that you helped when nobody else would. When you help other families, tell them what you told us. God loves you. This church loves you. You're not alone." That message saved us. It can save others too, for the songs that raised me. Elvis Presley. Reverend Hamill read the note aloud to the elders. Every one of them was crying by the time he finished. $5,000, one elder whispered. "We can fix the roof, replace the broken windows, buy new hymnals, help so many families." "No," Reverend Hamill said quietly. "We're going to do what Elvis asked. We're going to use this to help families who are struggling, just like we helped the Presleys. That's what this gift is for. That's what Elvis wants." The families they helped. Over the next year, the First Assembly of God Church used Elvis's $5,000 donation to help 23 families in Tupelo who were struggling with poverty, medical bills, or other crises. They paid rent for families facing eviction. They bought groceries for families who couldn't afford food. They covered medical bills for families with sick children. They provided school supplies and clothes for kids who needed them. Every time the church helped a family, Reverend Hamill would tell them, "This help comes from someone who was once in your shoes, someone who remembers what it's like to have nothing. He wants you to know that God loves you, this church loves you, and you're not alone." The church never publicly revealed that the money came from Elvis. They respected his wish for anonymity. But word slowly spread through Tupelo's poor community. The First Assembly was helping people in a new way, with more resources than they'd ever had before. One of the families helped was the Johnsons, a mother and 3 children whose father had died in a factory accident. They were about to lose their home because they couldn't pay rent. The church paid 3 months of rent, giving the widow time to find work and stabilize. Mrs. Johnson later said, "When Reverend Hamill told me the church was going to help with rent, I cried. I asked where the money came from. He said, from someone who understands what it's like to struggle." I didn't know it was Elvis until years later, but it didn't matter who it was. What mattered was that someone cared enough to help. The secret kept for years. Elvis's donation to the First Assembly of God remained largely unknown to the public for over a decade. The church kept it private, respecting Elvis's clear wish for no publicity. Reverend Hamill never spoke about it publicly during Elvis's lifetime, but in the church, the story was passed down. Members who'd been there that Sunday morning in 1957 would tell new members about the day Elvis came back, about the note he wrote, about how his gift had helped dozens of families. Elvis could have just sent a check, one longtime member said. He could have made a big public donation and gotten credit for it. Instead, he drove to Tupelo, walked into our small church, sat through a service like a regular person, and quietly left $5,000 with a note that said, "For the songs that raised me." That tells you who he really was. Elvis visited the church a few more times over the years, always quietly, always when he was passing through Mississippi. He never brought photographers or press. He'd sit in on the back pew, sing the hymns he'd learned as a child, and sometimes leave another donation in the box, never as large as that first $5,000, but always generous. In 1971, Reverend Hamill retired. At his retirement party, he finally told the full story of Elvis's 1957 donation. He showed people the original note, which the church had preserved. "I kept this quiet while Elvis was still performing," Reverend Hamill said. "He didn't want publicity, but I think people should know what kind of man he was. He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the people who helped him. And when he had the chance to give back, he didn't hesitate." What Elvis's mother said. Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, died in 1958, less than a year after Elvis made his donation to the First Assembly Church. Before she died, she spoke with Reverend Hamill on the phone about Elvis's gift. "Reverend, I heard what Elvis did," Gladys said. "I heard about the money he gave. I want to thank you for accepting it and for using it the way he wanted." "Mrs. Presley, we're the ones who should be thanking you," Reverend Hamill said. "You raised a son who remembers where he came from, who gives back, who honors the people who helped him. That's your doing." "I just taught him what the church taught me," Gladys said, "that we're supposed to help each other, that when you're blessed, you bless others. Elvis has always had a good heart. Success didn't change that." Reverend Hamill later said that conversation was one of the most meaningful of his ministry. Mrs. Presley was so proud of Elvis, not because he was famous, but because he was kind, because he remembered his roots, because he used his success to help others. That's what mattered to her. The Scholarship Fund. In 1975, 18 years after Elvis's original donation, the First Assembly of God Church established the Elvis Presley Memorial Scholarship Fund. The fund provides financial assistance for children from low-income families to attend college, something Elvis himself had never been able to do. The fund was started with money the church had saved from various donations over the years, but it was inspired directly by Elvis's 1957 gift and his note about helping families who were struggling. Elvis gave us $5,000 in 1957 with instructions to help struggling families, the church board wrote in their announcement of the scholarship. "We've been doing that for 18 years. Now we want to continue his legacy by helping young people from poor families get an education." Elvis never went to college. His family couldn't afford it, but he always valued education. This scholarship honors his memory and his heart for people who need help. The scholarship has helped over 200 students attend college since 1975. Each scholarship recipient receives not just financial aid, but also a copy of Elvis's original note, "For the songs that raised me." "Reading that note reminds us why we're here," one scholarship recipient said. "We're here because someone who had nothing, who became someone with everything, never forgot where he came from. That's the kind of person I want to be." Has a church or community organization ever helped you or your family during a hard time? An organization that gave you hope when you had nothing? Share their name in the comments. Let's honor the places that help people in their darkest moments. The Note That Traveled. Elvis's handwritten note, "For the Songs That Raised Me," has become one of the most famous artifacts of his charitable work. After the church shared it publicly in 1971, photos of the note circulated among Elvis fans and eventually became widely known. The phrase, "For the Songs That Raised Me," has taken on a life of its own. It's been used as the title of multiple books about Elvis's gospel music, quoted in documentaries about Elvis's faith and generosity, printed on merchandise sold at Graceland, referenced in songs written about Elvis after his death, used as a motto by churches and charitable organizations. But beyond its cultural impact, the phrase captures something profound about Elvis's understanding of debt and gratitude. He didn't just mean gospel songs when he wrote "The Songs That Raised Me." He meant the faith, the community, the love that those songs represented. Elvis understood that he didn't become who he was alone, said music historian Robert Gordon. He was raised by a church community that taught him about faith, music, generosity, and compassion. When he wrote "For the Songs That Raised Me," he was acknowledging that debt. He was saying, "I am who I am because of what you gave me." That's humility. That's gratitude. That's character. The roof that almost collapsed. In 1960, 3 years after Elvis's donation, the First Assembly of God Church faced a crisis. The roof was failing, and repairs would cost $8,000, far more than the church could afford. The building inspector gave them 6 months to fix it, or the church would be condemned and forced to close. The congregation was devastated. They'd been meeting in this building for 30 years. It was the heart of their community. But they simply didn't have $8,000. Reverend Hamill wrote to Elvis, not asking for money, just updating him on the situation. "I know you've already given so much," Hamill wrote. "I'm not asking for more. I just wanted you to know what's happening to the church where you grew up. We're praying for a miracle." 2 weeks later, a check arrived from Elvis for $10,000. The note said, "For the roof and whatever else the church needs. This building is where I learned to sing and learned about God. We can't let it close. Fix the roof. Use the extra for other repairs. And Reverend, you never have to hesitate to ask me for help. This church helped my family. I'll always help this church." The roof was repaired. The church stayed open, and the congregation had $2,000 left over, which they used to help more struggling families. Exactly what Elvis would have wanted. The legacy in Tupelo. Today, the First Assembly of God Church in Tupelo still stands. The building has been renovated several times over the years, but it's still the same church where Elvis learned to sing as a small boy. Inside the church is a small museum room dedicated to Elvis's connection to the congregation. On display are the original donation box where Elvis placed his 1957 envelope, a copy of his handwritten note "For the Songs That Raised Me," photos of Elvis as a child attending services, a replica of the chair he used to stand on to sing hymns, letters he wrote to Reverend Hamill over the years, documentation of the families helped by his donations. The room also includes testimonies from people whose lives were changed by Elvis's generosity, the families who received help, the students who got scholarships, the church members who witnessed his quiet acts of giving. One testimony, from a woman named Dorothy Reed, says, "My family was helped by the church in 1958 when we were about to be evicted. I didn't know until years later that the money came from Elvis. By then he was dead, and I couldn't thank him. So I've spent my life trying to be like him, remembering where I came from, helping people who are struggling, giving back when I have the chance. That's how I thank him, by continuing what he started." What the church taught Elvis. Reverend Hamill, in a 1976 interview 1 year before Elvis's death, reflected on what the church had meant to Elvis. People think of Elvis as a rock and roll rebel, and he was that on stage, but in his heart, he was a gospel singer who loved the Lord. The faith he learned in our church never left him. Elvis told me once that everything he knew about performing came from watching people worship. The passion, the emotion, the complete surrender to the moment, that's what he saw in our little church when he was a boy. That's what he brought to his music. But more than performance, this church taught Elvis about community, about helping each other, about using whatever gifts you have to bless others. Those lessons shaped him more than any musical training could have. When Elvis gave that $5,000 in 1957, he wasn't just being generous. He was practicing what we'd taught him, that what you receive, you give back. What you're blessed with, you use to bless others. That's the foundation of faith. Elvis lived that. The song Elvis never recorded. In 1959, Elvis wrote a song called "The Little Church." It was about his childhood church in Tupelo, about the faith he'd learned there, about the people who'd helped his family. The song was deeply personal, with lyrics like, "In a little church on the wrong side of town, where the paint was chipped and the roof was brown, I learned about love that doesn't count the cost. I learned about grace for the broken and lost." Elvis never recorded the song commercially. He felt it was too personal, too sacred to turn into a product. But he sang it privately, in hotel rooms and at Graceland, for friends and family. After Elvis died, the handwritten lyrics were found in his personal papers at Graceland. His estate considered releasing it posthumously, but ultimately decided to respect Elvis's wish to keep it private. The lyrics are displayed at Graceland, and visitors often cry when they read them. The song reveals Elvis's deep connection to his childhood church and his understanding that everything he became started in that small building in Tupelo. After hearing this story, are you going to give back to a place that helped you when you had nothing? A church, a school, a community center, wherever you received help. Share in the comments what you're going to do. Let's honor the places that raised us by giving back. What this story teaches us, September 1957. A famous singer returned to the small church where he'd grown up poor. He could have sent a check from Hollywood. He could have made a big public donation with photographers present. He could have done the minimum and moved on. Instead, Elvis drove to Tupelo, walked into that church, sat through a service like a regular member, and quietly left $5,000 with a note. "For the songs that raised me." No publicity, no cameras, no credit, just gratitude. That's character. That's integrity. That's remembering where you came from and honoring the people who helped you get where you are. How many of us, when we achieve success, forget the people who helped us along the way? How many of us move up and forget to reach back down? How many of us make it and never return to thank the community that raised us? Elvis never forgot. He never stopped being the poor kid from Tupelo who'd been helped by a small church. And when he had the resources to give back, he didn't hesitate. The church had given him faith, music, community, and hope when his family had nothing. Elvis gave back financially, but more importantly, he gave back the message, we're supposed to help each other. When you're blessed, you bless others. When you receive, you give back. That's the lesson from the little church in Tupelo. That's what "For the songs that raised me" really means. It means acknowledging that we don't become who we are alone. We're raised by communities, by people who invest in us, by places that give us foundation. And when we succeed, we have a responsibility to give back to those places, to help the next generation the way we were helped, to continue the cycle of generosity that made our success possible. You might not have $5,000 to give, but you have something: time, talent, gratitude, presence, something you can give back to the place that raised you. The question is, will you? Will you remember the people who helped you when you had nothing? Will you return to the places that gave you foundation? Will you give back to ensure that others receive the same help you received? Because that's what Elvis did. That's what the church taught him. And that's what we should all aspire to do. Remember where you came from. Honor the people who helped you. Give back when you have the chance. For the songs that raised you. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories to discover more moments that prove success means nothing if you forget where you came from. Share this story with someone who helped you when you had nothing. Let them know they're not forgotten, and give back to the place that raised you, however you can, whenever you can, because someone invested in you once. Now it's your turn to invest in others for the songs that raised you.